If you ever find yourself working alone in an old hotel and the manager gives you only one rule, listen carefully. Because sometimes the strangest rule is the one that keeps you alive. Eleanor Hayes learned that on her first evening at the Black Pine Hotel. The hotel stood deep in the Maine mountains, surrounded by tall black pines and a road that disappeared into the forest long before it reached the nearest town. Rain had been falling since noon. By dusk, the windows rattled whenever the wind came down from the hills. Eleanor arrived with one suitcase, a damp coat, and exactly $11 in her purse. Henry Vale, the hotel manager, looked at her application beside the reception desk. Housekeeping experience? 3 years. Good. He stamped the paper. Breakfast at 7. Work begins at 6. Eleanor nodded. Then Henry lowered his voice. There is one room you don't clean. She looked up. Which one? 14. He said it so casually that Eleanor almost smiled. Is it occupied? No. Then who's cleaning it? Nobody. Eleanor waited for him to explain. He didn't. She glanced toward the staircase. Is the room being repaired? No. Closed for inspection? No. Then why can't I clean it? Henry finally looked at her. Because I said so. There was nothing threatening in his voice. That somehow made it worse. Eleanor gave a small shrug. Fine. Room 14 can survive without me. From behind the linen shelves came a dry voice. That's what they all say. Eleanor turned. An older woman stood there holding a stack of folded sheets. Henry's expression tightened. Mrs. Bell? The woman looked at Eleanor. Agnes Bell? Eleanor Hayes? Agnes nodded slowly. Then her eyes moved toward the staircase. 3rd floor. Eleanor followed her gaze. Room 14? Agnes didn't answer. She simply walked past Eleanor and disappeared through a service door. Eleanor watched her go. Friendly staff, she murmured. Henry almost smiled. You'll get used to them. She wouldn't. Not after what happened upstairs. A little after 9, Eleanor carried fresh towels to the 3rd floor. The corridor was narrow and quiet, with dark wooden walls and faded wallpaper. At the far end stood room 14. Its door looked different from the others. No brass room number, just a small black metal plate. For a son. Eleanor stopped. She could hear rain tapping against the window at the end of the hall. Nothing else. Then she noticed something. A thin line of warm light beneath room 14's door. Eleanor frowned. Henry had said the room was empty. She stepped closer. The light was unmistakably coming from inside. Then came a soft sound. Porcelain touching wood. A cup being placed on a table. Eleanor stood completely still. Another sound followed. A chair scraping slowly across the floor. She should have walked away. Instead, she leaned toward the door. And a woman's voice came softly from inside. Eleanor? Her breath stopped. The voice spoke again. You're late. Eleanor's hand slowly moved toward the doorknob. And from somewhere behind her, Agnes Bell whispered, Don't open that door. Agnes's whisper barely carried across the corridor. Eleanor's fingers stopped against the brass doorknob. For a moment, neither woman moved. Then Eleanor slowly turned. Agnes stood several feet behind her, still holding the folded sheets. Her face had lost all its color. Who was that? Eleanor asked. Agnes didn't answer. Eleanor glanced back at room 14. The thin line of light was still visible beneath the door. Someone is in there. No. I heard her. I know. That answer unsettled Eleanor more than a denial would have. She stepped away from the door. Then explain it. Agnes tightened her grip on the sheets. Come downstairs. No. Eleanor, If the room is empty, why is someone talking to me from inside it? Agnes looked toward the door. Then she whispered, because sometimes it isn't empty. Before Eleanor could respond, footsteps sounded on the stairs. Henry Vale appeared at the end of the corridor. His eyes went immediately to room 14. What happened? Eleanor pointed toward the door. I heard someone inside. Henry stopped. Did you open it? No. Good. He pulled a ring of keys from his pocket. Eleanor stared at him. You said nobody goes in there. I said you don't clean it. And now you're carrying the key? Henry ignored the question. He walked to the door. Agnes caught his sleeve. Henry? He looked at her. She shook her head once. Don't. Henry gently removed her hand. If someone is inside, we need to know. He fitted a long brass key into the lock. The light beneath the door disappeared. Eleanor frowned. Where did it go? Henry turned the key. Click. The door opened. Cold air moved through the corridor. Eleanor expected to see someone standing inside. There was nobody. Henry pushed the door wider. The room was perfectly arranged. A bed stood against the far wall, its white coverlet untouched. The fireplace was black and cold. The curtains were drawn tightly across the windows. There wasn't even dust on the furniture. Eleanor stepped inside. Henry immediately said, "Stay where you are." She ignored him. Her eyes moved across the room. Nothing. No woman. No chair pulled away from the table. No sign that anyone had been there. Maybe she left through another door, Eleanor said. There isn't one. Window? Third floor. Eleanor looked at him. Henry's jaw tightened. Agnes remained in the doorway. Eleanor walked toward the writing desk. Then she stopped. A porcelain cup sat beside an old silver spoon. Steam curled from its surface. Eleanor stared at it. Henry. He didn't answer. She pointed. You said the room was empty. It is. Then why is that tea hot? Henry's face changed. Not surprise. Fear. Eleanor reached toward the cup. Agnes suddenly said, Don't touch it. Eleanor's hand froze. She looked at Agnes. Why? Agnes stepped into the room. Because it wasn't there the last time. Henry turned sharply. Agnes. What? She said. She's already seen it. Eleanor looked between them. Seen what? Neither answered. On the desk, beside the steaming cup, lay a small photograph. Eleanor picked it up. The photograph was old. The edges were yellow and cracked. It showed the Black Pine Hotel decades earlier, its windows dark beneath a snow-covered roof. But Eleanor barely noticed the building, because someone was standing in front of room 14, a young woman, wearing a housekeeping uniform. Eleanor stared at her face. Her fingers began to tremble. The woman in the photograph had Eleanor's face. Not similar, not close. Exactly the same. Eleanor turned the photograph over. There was writing on the back. Eleanor Hayes, room 14, 1923. Her eyes lifted slowly toward Henry. Who took this? Henry said nothing. Agnes looked at the photograph, then at Eleanor, and quietly whispered, You weren't supposed to see that. Agnes's words hung in the room. Eleanor kept staring at the photograph. The young woman in the picture had the same narrow jaw, the same dark eyes, even the same small mark beneath her left eyebrow. Eleanor touched her own eyebrow. That's me. No, Henry said. Eleanor looked at him. Then who is it? Henry stepped forward and held out his hand. Give me the photograph. She pulled it away. No. His expression hardened. Eleanor. You knew. I knew nothing about you when you arrived. Then how does my name appear on a photograph from 1923? Henry's eyes moved toward the desk. For the first time, Eleanor noticed that he wasn't looking at her. He was looking at the room, as though he expected something else to appear. Agnes quietly closed the door behind them. Eleanor, she said, you need to leave this room. Not until someone tells me what's happening. Henry stepped toward the fireplace. Where did you find the photograph? It was beside the tea. Did you touch anything else? The cup. Agnes's face tightened. Henry looked sharply at Eleanor's hand. Which hand? What? The cup. Which hand did you use? Eleanor stared at him. My right. Henry said nothing. Agnes moved closer. Let me see. Eleanor held out her hand. There was a faint brown mark across her palm. She hadn't noticed it before. Agnes's expression changed. Henry? He looked at the mark, then immediately walked to the fireplace. He took the photograph from Eleanor before she could stop him. What are you doing? Henry struck a match. The flame caught the corner of the photograph. Eleanor grabbed his wrist. No! The photograph slipped from his hand. It landed on the carpet. The flame went out. Eleanor picked it up. The picture was still intact, but something had changed. The woman standing outside room 14 was no longer looking toward the camera. Her face was turned slightly toward Eleanor, as if she were watching her. Eleanor's stomach tightened. What did you do? Henry stared at the photograph. I didn't do anything. Agnes bent down and picked up the photograph. She turned it over. The handwriting on the back looked darker now. Eleanor Hayes, room 14, 1923. Beneath it, another line had appeared. She arrived late. Agnes dropped it. Eleanor stepped backward. Who wrote that? Neither answered. A clock somewhere downstairs began to strike. 1, 2, 3. Eleanor looked toward the open door. We're leaving. Henry didn't move. Henry? He walked past her into the corridor. Stay close. They moved toward the staircase, but Eleanor stopped. Wait. At the far end of the corridor, the door to room 14 was open again. Henry had closed it. Eleanor was certain. How? A soft sound came from inside. A drawer sliding open. Then another. Paper rustling. Agnes whispered, Don't look. Eleanor looked anyway. On the writing desk, something white had appeared. A hotel register. She walked toward it. Henry caught her arm. Eleanor, no. She pulled free. Why are you afraid of a book? She opened the register. The pages were yellow with age. Names filled the columns. Dates. Room numbers. Housekeepers. Then Eleanor saw it. Eleanor Hayes, 1923. She turned the page. Another. Eleanor Hayes, 1924. Another. Eleanor Hayes, 1925. Her breathing became shallow. She flipped faster. 28. Mine 1929. 1930. The same name. The same handwriting. The same occupation. Housekeeper. Eleanor stopped turning pages. At the bottom of the final entry was a line written in red ink. Room 14 cleaned at 12:03 a.m. That's impossible, Eleanor whispered. Agnes came closer. No. Eleanor looked at her. Then what is it? Agnes reached into the pocket of her dress. Slowly, she removed a small brass key. She placed it on the register. If you really want the truth, Agnes said, you'll have to understand one thing first. Eleanor stared at the key. Agnes's voice dropped. Room 14 doesn't have guests. She looked directly into Eleanor's eyes. It remembers housekeepers. The key suddenly turned by itself. Click. From inside the locked room came the sound of a woman softly humming. The key stopped turning. The humming continued. Eleanor stared at the brass key lying on the register. Who is humming? Agnes didn't answer. Henry reached for the key. Before his fingers touched it, a man's voice came from the staircase. Agnes? Everyone turned. A young man stood halfway up the stairs, holding a bundle of account books against his chest. He looked from Eleanor to Henry, then to the open door of room 14. His expression changed. You opened it. Henry's voice hardened. Thomas, go back downstairs. Thomas didn't move. That's not what you told me last time. Agnes stepped between them. Thomas? He looked at Eleanor. I'm Thomas Reed. I handle the hotel's records. Eleanor glanced at the register. Then you can explain this. Thomas came closer. His eyes fell on the repeated entries. He slowly set the account books on the floor. I've seen those names. How many? He hesitated. 11. Eleanor's throat tightened. 11? Eleanor Hayes? Thomas nodded. All housekeepers. Henry snapped. That's enough. No, Eleanor said. It isn't. She turned another page. There they were. 11 entries. Different years, different handwriting. The same name, the same age, the same occupation. And at the bottom of every entry, that same sentence. Room 14, cleaned at 12:03 a.m. Eleanor looked at Thomas. How old were they? 28. Eleanor went still. Thomas looked at her. You said you were 28. I am. Nobody spoke. The humming inside room 14 stopped. Eleanor slowly turned toward the doorway. The room was empty. She looked back at the register. These records could have been altered. Thomas shook his head. Not the older ones. How do you know? Because the paper predates the hotel ledger system. He opened one of his account books. I found something in the basement this afternoon. Henry stepped forward. Thomas? But Thomas had already pulled out a folded document. He placed it on the register. It was a payroll sheet. Dust still clung to its edges. Eleanor leaned over it. Her eyes moved across the faded columns, then stopped. Employee, Eleanor Hayes. Her pulse quickened. What's the date? Thomas didn't answer. Eleanor looked herself. October 3rd, 1901. For several seconds, she couldn't breathe. I wasn't born in 1901. Thomas's face was pale. I know. Henry grabbed the paper. Where did you find this? Behind the old boiler? Agnes stared at Eleanor. There's more. Eleanor looked at her. Agnes reached toward the brass key. I've kept this for 22 years. She picked it up. It's been passed from one housekeeper to another. Why? Agnes looked toward room 14. Because every woman who worked here eventually received it. Eleanor swallowed. And what happened to them? Agnes didn't answer. The key slipped from her fingers. It struck the register, then moved. Slowly. By itself. Across the page. Eleanor watched it slide toward the final entry. Eleanor Hayes, 1923. The key stopped. A sound came from the corridor. Soft, rhythmic. Wooden wheels rolling over the floorboards. Everyone froze. A housekeeping cart. It was coming toward them. Thomas whispered, "Nobody is working upstairs." The wheels stopped directly outside the office. No one moved. Then came 3 quiet knocks. Knock, knock, knock. Henry reached for the door handle. Agnes grabbed his wrist. Don't. From the other side of the door came the faint scrape of a cleaning brush. Then a woman's voice whispered, "Room 14 is ready." Nobody inside the office moved. The cleaning brush scraped once more against the floor outside. Henry's hand remained on the door handle. Agnes tightened her grip around his wrist. "Don't open it." Henry looked at her. "Then what do you suggest?" "Wait." "For what?" Agnes didn't answer. The wheels of the housekeeping cart creaked. Slowly, they began moving away. One roll, then another, then silence. Eleanor looked at Henry. "What was that?" Henry pulled his hand from the handle. "I don't know." Thomas gave a nervous laugh. "You've worked here for years." Henry stared at the door. "I said I don't know." The cart wheels sounded again. This time they were moving toward the staircase. Eleanor stepped closer to the door. "We should see who's out there." Agnes caught her arm. "No." "But someone is pushing a cart." "That's exactly why you shouldn't." Eleanor looked at her. "Why?" Agnes's grip loosened. "Because there hasn't been a housekeeping cart on this floor since yesterday morning." Eleanor opened the door. The corridor was empty. A wooden housekeeping cart stood beneath the dim wall lamp. Fresh white sheets were stacked neatly on top. A silver bucket hung from one side. A small brass plate was fixed to the front. Return. Thomas stepped beside Eleanor. "I've never seen that cart before." Henry remained inside the office. "Nobody touch it." Eleanor looked at the floor. There were wet footprints. Bare feet. They started beside the cart. One after another, they crossed the corridor. Toward room 14. Eleanor followed them with her eyes. The door stood open. Agnes whispered behind her, "Eleanor." But Eleanor was already walking. One step, then another. The wet footprints continued into the room. She stopped at the threshold. The air inside felt colder than the corridor. The bed was still perfectly made. The curtains remained closed. The footprints crossed the carpet and disappeared beside the writing desk. Then Eleanor noticed something on the desk. A cleaning cloth. She stepped inside. "Don't," Henry said behind her. Eleanor picked it up. The cloth was damp. She turned it over. Small embroidered letters were stitched into one corner. E.H. Her fingers tightened around it. "These are my initials." Thomas entered the room. "That's not possible." Eleanor looked at him. "What isn't?" He pointed toward the embroidery. "Look at the stitching." The thread was faded and yellow. Old. Very old. Eleanor turned the cloth over again. A date had been sewn beneath the initials. 1901. Her face went pale. Agnes entered the room. She looked at the cloth, then immediately looked away. "You knew." Agnes whispered, "I suspected." "Suspected what?" Before Agnes could answer, the door behind them slowly swung shut. Click. Henry grabbed the handle. Locked. "Eleanor," he said, "step away from the desk." She turned. The mirror above the fireplace caught her reflection. For 1 second, everything looked normal. Then Eleanor noticed another figure in the mirror. A woman stood behind her. Same uniform, same dark hair, same face. Eleanor spun around. Nothing. She looked back at the mirror. The woman was still there. This time she was closer. Eleanor's breathing stopped. "Agnes." Agnes looked at the mirror. Her face collapsed with recognition. The woman in the reflection slowly turned toward Eleanor. Her eyes were dark. There were old bruises beneath them. Her lips moved. No sound came at first. Then the whisper came from somewhere inside the room. "You shouldn't have opened the door." The lamp went out. Darkness swallowed the room. Eleanor heard Agnes gasp. Thomas stumbled against the desk. Then footsteps moved across the carpet. Slow, bare, coming directly toward Eleanor. She backed away. One step, another. Down disclaimer. This is an original fictional horror story created for entertainment purposes. The story is set in Maine in 1923, a period when historic hotels, inns, boarding houses, and seasonal guest houses were already an established part of the state's history. Historical records confirm the existence of Maine guest houses and hotels during this era, including documented 1923 guest house records from Old Orchard Beach. Maine also has a long tradition of reported haunted inns and unexplained paranormal experiences. Such accounts, including reports of unexplained footsteps, voices, apparitions, cold spots, and objects moving, are part of regional folklore and eyewitness testimony, but they should not be treated as scientifically proven, supernatural events. However, Black Pine Hotel, Eleanor Hayes, Room 14, the historical records, the repeated Eleanor Hayes housekeepers, the 1901 payroll record, and the events described in this story are fictional. Any resemblance to an actual hotel, employee, guest, historical document, or paranormal account is purely coincidental. This story combines historical atmosphere, documented aspects of Maine's hotel history, and fictional supernatural elements to create an original horror narrative. Viewer discretion is advised. The wet footprints continued into the room. She stopped at the threshold. The air inside felt colder than the corridor. The bed was still perfectly made. The curtains remained closed. The footprints crossed the carpet and disappeared beside the writing desk. Then Eleanor noticed something on the desk. A cleaning cloth. She stepped inside. "Don't," Henry said behind her. Eleanor picked it up. The cloth was damp. She turned it over. Small embroidered letters were stitched into one corner. E.H. Her fingers tightened around it. "These are my initials." Thomas entered the room. "That's not possible." Eleanor looked at him. "What isn't?" He pointed toward the embroidery. "Look at the stitching." The thread was faded and yellow. Old. Very old. Eleanor turned the cloth over again. A date had been sewn beneath the initials, No. 1. Her face went pale. Agnes entered the room. She looked at the cloth, then immediately looked away. "You knew," Agnes whispered. "I suspected." "Suspected what?" Before Agnes could answer, the door behind them slowly swung shut. Click. Henry grabbed the handle. Locked. "Eleanor," he said, "step away from the desk." She turned. The mirror above the fireplace caught her reflection. For 1 second, everything looked normal. Then Eleanor noticed another figure in the mirror. A woman stood behind her. Same uniform, same dark hair, same face. Eleanor spun around. Nothing. She looked back at the mirror. The woman was still there. This time, she was closer. Eleanor's breathing stopped. Agnes looked at the mirror. Her face collapsed with recognition. The woman in the reflection slowly turned toward Eleanor. Her eyes were dark. There were old bruises beneath them. Her lips moved. No sound came at first. Then the whisper came from somewhere inside the room. "You shouldn't have opened the door." The lamp went out. Darkness swallowed the room. Eleanor heard Agnes gasp. Thomas stumbled against the desk. Then footsteps moved across the carpet. Slow, bare, coming directly toward Eleanor. She backed away. One step, another. The footsteps stopped inches in front of her, and something cold touched her cheek. Something cold touched Eleanor's cheek. She flinched and raised both hands. Nothing was there. "Agnes?" Her voice shook. No answer. "Thomas?" A chair scraped violently across the floor. Then Thomas shouted, "The door!" Eleanor turned toward his voice. A thin line of light appeared beneath the door. The footsteps moved again, this time away from her. Eleanor heard them cross the carpet. Then the door handle turned. Click. The door swung open. Light from the corridor spilled into the room. Agnes was standing beside the fireplace. Thomas was pressed against the wall. Neither had touched the door. Eleanor stepped into the corridor. Where did she go? Agnes looked at the empty hallway. Who? The woman. Thomas stared at Eleanor. There was nobody here. I saw her. In the mirror. Agnes interrupted. Enough. We leave now. Eleanor followed her into the corridor. Thomas came behind them. The door to room 14 slowly closed. Click. Eleanor looked down. Something was wrapped around her fingers. She pulled it free. The cleaning cloth. She hadn't realized she was still holding it. Agnes saw the embroidered initials. Her face tightened. Give me that. Eleanor pulled it away. No. Agnes stopped. Eleanor, please. What is this? A cleaning cloth. From 1901. Agnes said nothing. Eleanor held it closer to the light. The embroidery was unmistakable. E.H. And beneath it, 1901. Thomas stared at the cloth. That date matches the payroll record. Eleanor looked at him. Then the woman in the mirror wasn't a trick. Henry came out of the office. Don't start imagining things. Eleanor turned on him. You knew about the previous housekeepers. Henry's expression remained blank. You knew my name was in those records? No. Then why are you afraid of that room? Henry didn't answer. Agnes did. Because people disappear there. Silence. Eleanor stared at her. What do you mean, disappear? Agnes looked toward room 14. They don't leave through the front door. Before Eleanor could ask anything else, footsteps sounded downstairs. A moment later, a tall man in a dark overcoat appeared at the bottom of the staircase. He looked up. Henry Vale? Henry straightened. Samuel. Samuel Whitmore climbed the stairs, carrying a leather case. His eyes moved from Henry to Agnes, then to Eleanor. Finally, he noticed the cloth in Eleanor's hand. His expression changed. Where did you get that? Room 14. Samuel stopped. Who sent you into that room? No one. Then why were you there? Eleanor looked directly at him. Because someone inside called my name. Samuel's face remained still, but his fingers tightened around the handle of his case. He walked upstairs. Show me the records. Henry stepped in front of him. Not tonight. Samuel looked at him. Then you'll explain why an employee from 1901 has the same name as the woman standing in front of me. Eleanor's stomach tightened. You knew. Samuel looked at her. I knew the records existed. Do they explain this? She held up the cloth. Samuel stared at it. No. Then what does? He looked toward room 14. Nothing supernatural. Eleanor frowned. What? Rooms don't remember people. Samuel opened his case. People make other people believe they do. He pulled out an old ledger. There has to be a pattern. Eleanor stepped closer. Then let's find it. They returned to room 14. Samuel unlocked the door. Inside, he examined the walls, fireplace, desk, and floorboards. Eleanor knelt beside the bed. Something hard caught her finger. She reached underneath. Her hand closed around a small leather ledger. She pulled it out. Dust fell onto the carpet. Thomas opened it. The pages were filled with names, dates, short notes. Then he reached the final page. His voice dropped. December 14th, 1923. Eleanor leaned closer. Her name was written there. Eleanor Hayes. Beneath it, cleaning begins at 12:03. Eleanor looked toward the wall clock. The minute hand moved, 2:02. Henry suddenly stepped toward the door. "Everyone out!" Eleanor didn't move. The clock ticked, 2:02. Another tick. The door slammed shut. The lock turned by itself, and somewhere inside the room, a woman began whispering Eleanor's name. The woman whispered Eleanor's name again. "Eleanor!" She stood frozen beside the desk. Henry pulled at the door handle. "Open it." Thomas grabbed the lock. "It isn't moving." Agnes stepped toward the door. "Henry, stop." He turned. "Stop?" Agnes looked at the clock. 2:02. "Wait." Eleanor stared at her. "For what?" Agnes's eyes filled with something Eleanor had never seen in them before. Fear. 2:03. The second hand moved. One tick, then another. 2:03. The room changed. Not violently, quietly. The wallpaper darkened first. Then faint shapes appeared across it. Photographs. Dozens of them. Eleanor stepped closer. Each photograph showed the same woman. Different dresses. Different hairstyles. Different years. But always the same face. Eleanor Hayes. Thomas whispered, 11. Agnes shook her head. More than 11. Another photograph appeared. Fresh. The paper looked clean and white. Eleanor walked toward it. Her own face stared back at her. She was standing inside room 14, wearing the same uniform she had put on that morning. Eleanor's breath caught. "That's impossible." Thomas looked at the bottom corner. There was a date. December 14th, 1948. Eleanor stared at it. 1948? She turned toward Agnes. "We're in 1923. Agnes didn't answer. Eleanor looked back at the photograph. Something was wrong. Behind her stood the door to room 14, and beside the door was a woman, Eleanor, older, bruised beneath the eyes. Watching her, Eleanor stepped backward. The mirror above the fireplace caught her movement. Her reflection didn't follow. Eleanor stopped. The reflection remained still. Then it slowly turned away from her. Eleanor's voice disappeared. "Agnes." Everyone looked at the mirror. Inside it, another Eleanor was kneeling on the floor. She was holding a cleaning cloth. Slowly she began wiping the carpet. Thomas backed away. "That's not possible." The reflected Eleanor continued cleaning. Back and forth, back and forth. Then she stopped. She lifted her head and looked directly at the real Eleanor. Her lips moved. "You shouldn't have opened the door." Eleanor stepped closer to the mirror. "What do you want?" The reflection smiled faintly. Not kindly, almost sadly. "You're late." Henry slammed his fist against the door. "Eleanor, whatever you do, don't clean the room." She turned. On the desk lay the brass key. Beside it was the old cleaning cloth, the same one she had found earlier. Eleanor reached toward the key. Agnes shouted, "No!" Eleanor stopped. Agnes stepped forward. "The hotel tried to destroy this room." Henry looked at her sharply. "Agnes." "They burned the furniture," she continued. "They sealed the windows. They tore down the walls." Thomas stared at her. "And?" Agnes looked toward the photographs. Every time they tried, the room came back. Eleanor looked at the mirror. And the housekeepers? Agnes's voice broke. They were told to clean it. Eleanor looked down at the cloth, then at the key. She understood. The room wasn't waiting for someone to enter. It was waiting for someone to finish a task. Her hand closed around the brass key. The reflected Eleanor stopped cleaning. She stood, walked toward the mirror, and placed her palm against the glass. Eleanor slowly raised her own hand. Their palms met through the mirror. The reflection whispered, "Don't let it remember you." The glass cracked. Eleanor jumped back. The photographs on the walls began disappearing one by one, except the newest one, the photograph dated 1948. Eleanor picked it up. Her fingers trembled. On the back, new writing appeared. Not slowly, not mysteriously. The ink simply formed across the paper. Eleanor Hayes, room 14. Then beneath it, cleaning completed at 12:03 a.m. Eleanor stared at the words. The room became completely silent. Then, from behind her, she heard the soft scrape of a cleaning brush. She turned. Nobody stood there. Only the mirror. Her reflection was gone. And from inside the empty mirror, a woman's voice whispered, "You're late." The door unlocked. Eleanor didn't open it. Not yet. She understood the rule now. The room had never needed a housekeeper to clean it. It needed one to believe she had to. And somewhere behind the walls of the Black Pine Hotel, something had just remembered her name.